Post Thanksgiving, why wells fail. Lloyd Brown. Did you introduce dynamic equilibrium into your Thanksgiving?
No, there was no equilibrium in Thanksgiving. Well, there was. It was when your stomach can't hold anymore, right?
Right. Well, today we're talking about dynamic equilibrium. It's part of the refined, my goodness, your process.
The Pathfinder process.
Yeah, it's part of the patented Pathfinder process, dynamic equilibrium. It's a law. You take something static, you introduce a new variable in there, creates, takes it from a static situation to a chaos situation, so to speak. And you figure out how to get that thing back into proper tension. And what does it do? That much like life, we're going along, we've got everything status quo. It's typical story format, status quo, everybody's happy, and then you learn something that changed everything up, and then you go through this scenario where you adjust to it and try to get back to equilibrium. But it's the same thing going on down hole, and it's part of life. You're growing, you graduate, you got this degree. Hey, I'm going to go get a job, and then things aren't like what you thought, but you adjust to it after you learn. Same thing in your process there. Where did that light bulb ever come on for you guys?
Well, we were looking at, and this is all the way back in 2016 and 17. We were trying to understand why a well, a second well on a lease, in the industry is called a parent. You have a parent-child effect. The parent wells were always drilled to hold the lease hold. So in oil and gas, you acquire the opportunity to drill a land from the mineral interest owner, and if you don't do it within a specific set of time, you lose it. So you lose the money you paid to have the opportunity to go get that. Well, back then, talk about dynamic, there was all kinds of people out buying and selling leases, and companies were going in and they were drilling one well and they were holding the acreage, but then they used that well as their standard on what all of the acreage was going to give them. And then when they came back later and they drilled the rest of the wells in like this section, 640 acre section, there would be the secondary wells never produced as good as the parent well, the first well. And it didn't make a lot of sense. There were all these theories out there behind it, because when you looked at the geology, you're like, there's no difference. There's the same amount of hydrocarbon here. And there was saying, hey, there's cross communication, which is true. There's all these different reasons that the child was not as good as the parent. But what we started looking at is, well, what else has changed? And the number one thing that had changed was when they were going in and drilling and completing the secondary wells on these leases, they were doing 4 and 5, 6 wells at a time, not just one. And so we started looking at how long the frac was staying displaced in the well, the number of days. And we started looking at, well, one of the consistent variables is when the acreage was being HBP'd, held by production, they would go in and drill it, frac it, open it up and go. And so there was a real short window that geology was sitting with the fluids on it, where the static equilibrium, which equilibrium is a law, a physical law, and it's where something has reached a place of stasis, that it's not in a change anymore. And all of these targeted areas in unconventional geology, they have taken millions of years to get to a place where there's just not a lot going on in them. There's been time, there's been pressure, there's been temperature, for a real long time on this geology, and it's converted organic material, plants, animals, sea life into hydrocarbon. Well, so we've got this geology that's in a place of stasis. We frack it and we take it from a static or a place of equilibrium, and we put it into disruption. And we were sitting there just looking at it. What is the impact of that? And we had one company, Laredo Petroleum, said, "Hey, can you help us figure out how long we can keep a well shut in, and what do we need to do to preserve it?" Because we were learning, there were certain mechanisms that were causing the geology to not give up all the oil. And it was in this time that we started understanding the effects of the fluid, the frac fluid sitting behind the pipe for a much longer period of time. And then the secondary part of it was we went from a 1 mile lateral length to 2 mile lateral lengths to 3 mile lateral lengths. So you started looking at the number of days this fluid could be on the rock. When we first fracked them, we were maybe 12 or 15 days, to where we started doing multi-well pads. We could have wells shut in for 40, 50, 60 days. And you could even see it immediately when the water's coming back, there was a difference. And so that's what brought us, that was the beginning of coming to understand the disruption that we were doing and the impacts of that disruption. And then ultimately that led to our journey and our discovery that we have now patented, of what was the consequences of this disruption. And we then learned the consequence and the mechanism of the disruption. And then we developed in a method of understanding how to suppress that disruption to keep the geology in a place where it wasn't completely degrading, generating H2S, CO2, and a lot of migratable fines from clays. We learned how to keep that and put it into a dynamic equilibrium. And the definition of dynamic equilibrium is keeping it in a state that it allows the geology to stay in a solid place, but still gives us the ability to mobilize and remove the oil and gas from the rock. And so that's the journey that we've been on. And we just continue to get phenomenal traction as we're meeting with companies, and everybody looks at this, especially the geologists, the petrophysicists, the geophysicists. They're all like, "How did we miss this?" I mean, literally had a call last Tuesday, and one of the gentlemen's like, "How did we miss this?" And so we talked about this story. And part of the challenge is once you start having groupthink and everybody starts believing that they know what something is, it just leads you and puts you on a set of blinders. It's really cool. Last night I was watching a show on 60 Minutes, and these kids are doing bio chemical competitions. And there's a group from a school in Georgia, and they're going to an international competition. And these are high school kids, all right? And their idea was, we're going to figure out how to create a blood test that'll determine within the shortest amount of time that you've been exposed to Lyme disease, and then what are the interventions that we can do to fix that. And the teacher, it was amazing. She goes, the kids brought this idea to me, and she goes, "I didn't think it was possible." And she goes, "But they were unencumbered of what they couldn't do. They're still living in the possibility of." And that's really where we are. We're curious. We're continually curious. And instead of saying things are absolutely no, well, just like today, we're sharing with you what the best is of what we've learned up to this point, but we know we haven't figured it all out. The industry gets to a place because of a desire to have a formula, one that works wherever it works, right? Simplicity, the manufacturing concept, it gives us blinders to what was sitting right there in front of all of our faces.
When I think about it, the fracking fluid sitting on the well for a long period of time, in my simple head, I think, oh, it's getting soggy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it won't flow through when things swell up and get soggy. But there's other things going on as well, not just the swelling.
Yeah, there's different kinds of clay. Some of them swell shut, and they make really good. That clay makes a great lake bottom, and you want that. And our playa lakes here in the Panhandle of Texas are clay beds. Now, the thing is if you ever break through that thing will never hold water. But the clay, the formation of those clays and those fines, they're elastic, and they'll absorb water, and then they'll release water, and that's when all the cracks show up. Well, downhole, they don't ever dry up. Once they're wet and you've allowed that water to be imbibed, it swells up, and it's kind of like your hands. Like last night, we had some Oriental food. This morning, I had trouble getting my ring on. I was retaining water. Well, you don't want your geology to swell up and retain water. That you don't want it to become bloated, because it really does. It keeps the ability of fluid to move back out, and that we use the term water block, but really it's the water is filled a space, and it's stacked upon itself, and it's made it to where the hydrocarbon is impeded from that to move into the wellbore. And then there's secondary things that are going on as well, that are reactions like the degradation of carbonates, which generates CO2, which creates a low pH environment. And you have the same type of things happening with pyrite, where it dissolves and it becomes sulfonic acid and makes H2S. And there's just all of these dynamics going on in the geology, and it's only compounds over time, like a pressure cooker. And so that's what we've learned, and that's what the difference is between dynamic and static. And we've got a couple of studies. They're so exciting, and I love in Varus, we're going back and looking all the way back to 2013 for wells that we did, like in the Eagle Ford, when we were heavily focused in the gas window in the Eagle Ford, and we're pulling up wells that used shell guard, which is still a part of the components that we utilize, and we're blown away in certain areas where we were doing the work. All of our wells are the leading wells in the EUR, and it's not EUR, it's the ultimate recovery. It's not estimated. These are actual recovery numbers, and they're coinciding with the latest studies that we have. And we're doing that now on a much more global basis. And again, it goes to, you protect the geology, and that was always our process back then. We just know more now how to do it even better today, and then really how to measure it. Back then, we thought we were measuring it. We really didn't know how well to measure it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Better, we've improved. And so that's where we're at. And it's exciting. I mean, it's this morning on one of our team meetings, we were looking at it, and it's just, it just is more convicting to do the right thing the right way. You get the right results. And now we're able, because of public databases, being able to measure that in a way that it keeps you from seeking out the results that you want to prove that you're right. The data is the data at this point, and it's gathered by somebody else and it's provided, and you're able to go look at that, and it's exciting.
So the economies of scale of fracking of that pad, not just drilling one, but to drill one and then many, the economies of getting that done and then moving on to the next. Using the Pathfinder process, does it elongate how long those wells can be closed in before they're pulled into production?
It is an absolute benefit for the length of time that it's shut in. And yes, we can keep it, and we have some portions of our study showing upwards of 60 days and still having the same parallel performance when it's even been shut in a longer period of time. But again, you're working against physical laws, thermodynamic laws that are working against you. And so the longer that you need to keep it in a place of protection and to guarantee that dynamic equilibrium, it's more difficult.
So it buys a little time for get resources lined up and get those pulled into production. I'm sure there's a process where they're able to bring those online in a certain amount of time. But to know that using the Pathfinder process, it allows you a little bit of flexibility on getting those resources pulled.
It does, and everybody wants to get the wells opened up because it's part of their cash flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
You made a $10 million investment. You want to start getting the return on your investment as quick as possible. And so, on the surface, Steve, all of the efficiencies that we've seen in the industry, there is no real low hanging fruit on that side of the business to gain efficiencies. Now, and there was an article out yesterday. One of the super majors is talking about getting more out of the rock. We know that historically we haven't done that, and that's what we're doing. We're on the cutting edge, the leading edge of now maximizing the resource potential, because the rapid manufacturing process that we've been doing is leaving a lot of hydrocarbon trapped and left behind.
Wow. So you're on top, got the optimized in general across the industry, and now getting the rock optimized, or the being a good steward and getting the most you can from that resource. But then you guys are also bringing a way to bring another potential line of revenue, or to experience another uplift with the CO2 process.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is we're reducing the cost of disposing of H2S and CO2. So that's a real measurable, tangible cost for when you put the hydrocarbon into transportation. And then you have the detrimental effects of CO2 and H2S. It's corrosion and scale. And then now we're working, and we have the ability to measure how much CO2 we did not ever produce. Because right now we've got almost every well that's been completed, unless it's used the shell guard and the refined process in it, is producing more CO2 and H2S than it can on our process. And so we have the ability and are working with companies that help us create a registry and a rating of the quality of our mathematics of what the old process produced and what our process produces, and helping our customers. Right now, they're buying carbon credits in the carbon world, and we want to take them from a buyer to ultimately potentially being a seller and or meeting 100% of their own internal demand. And that's a significant uplift to them. We're also in the process of helping identify what it means to be a responsibly resourced hydrocarbon, and it appears that we're going to have the ability for companies that use our process to be designated that for the wells that have used it, and that hydrocarbon can be sold to a refiner or processor for a, a a bonus on that production to make more per barrel because they're using and will be certified as a low carbon producing company.
Wow, it's just think like a year ago, most people just had this expectation of the well, but now you guys are bringing to, just like you were talking about those kids that were unencumbered by what they couldn't do. Now you're unencumbering a lot of these your customers to be able to realize additional profits that they weren't aware of.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
That's so cool. I think that's indicative of the era that we're entering now with AI. And yeah, I think we're able to take a lot of data and use that technology to recognize patterns that humans are oblivious to.
Yeah, there's two sides of that coin, right? I still believe that the human mind has all the ingenuity,
Creative power, yeah.
from our creator.
Mm-hmm.
And our creator makes AI look stupid, right? I mean,
well, think about it. Artificial intelligence means that there is an opposite and equal.
That's
natural,
right.
Natural
Intelligence. And the concern is we want it to help us. We don't want it to disable us.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is disable our ability to think, because we can get a lot of patterns recognized, but why? And, the ability to solve the why, you have to be able to ask great questions for AI. And, you taught me this early on, Steve. You're one of the first ones that said prompting's everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what we're doing. Prompting is, what is the right question to ask?
Right.
And that again goes to curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's exciting about this company and our team, is that, our inspiration is to steal Ted Lasso's line, which I think he stole from Walt Whitman. Be curious, right? Stay curious. And curiosity asks a lot of questions. So, and you think about it, a little kid, why? That needs to be us. And most of the time that's us. Sometimes we get stuck too.
Yeah. Well, that's where the Pathfinder process was born out of, is asking why. It would seem to make a reason. I've drilled a well here, it's producing X. The next well is going to do the same. But why? Why was it not? And then what did you do? You had to go to the data, look at it, and figure out what were the commonalities and the patterns. And now you're able to start clawing in all these additional public sources of data and reveal even more insights. But just having access to the data doesn't do anything until you start asking creative questions.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, and this was a conversation a few weeks ago, there was a couple of wells that were being compared. And in that comparison, the comparison was requiring a normalization. One well was a 3 mile lateral, one was a 2. And there was this normalization factor for the barrels produced per lateral foot. You can't, for true scientific evaluations, you've got to create as equal a foundation and not grade on a curve. I always hated the classes that graded you on a curve. Like, set the standards right, don't grade on the curve. because a curve's just a factor to make you feel good about what you're doing, right? And a curve's ultimately to make parents feel good about what their kids were getting graded on because they weren't learning what they needed to meet the standard of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense?
Yeah, the standard was movable.
Yeah, the standard needs to be the standard, and that's what, the scientific method. And part of what I love about being and practicing great science is making sure that your standard is your standard, and you don't change what the standard says to meet what your desired outcome. The outcome is what it is. But if you're gonna place a test, all of the parameters of that test need to be as close to the same as humanly possible to be able to measure the results and do a compare contrast.
So it makes me wonder, what was the standard that you landed on instead of per linear foot?
Well, I mean, the wells need to be the same lateral length. You need to compare a 2 mile to a 2 mile or a 3 mile to a 3 mile, because there's other physical laws I won't go into, engineering laws, about how the quality of the fracture is at the toe of a 3 mile versus a toe at the 2. And it's about, pressure, fracture gradients and things that right now I'm speaking really far outside of my area of expertise. And somebody's probably screaming at their screen if they're watching this right now. But ultimately you want to make sure you don't want to measure, Usain Bolt at 6'8", running, a set of hurdles against a 5'11" person. Oh, and let's normalize the height of the hurdles and all these different things. You don't do that. Everybody runs the same distance over the same height of hurdle, no matter what their physical is. That's why you're measuring who's the best. Same thing when we do a scientific method, we need to be measuring as close to the best and not normalizing or grading on a curve.
So someone reaches out to you and we start, what's the process look like where we start figuring out what's the best plan for their situation?
Well, the process is, let's learn about your geology. So number one is know the rock. So if we're able to get drill cuttings and run that through an XRF process, we're going to get a stratigraphical profile of your geology, and we're going to put that into our mathematical algorithms, and we're going to do a lot of mathematical equations that help us understand how disruption is going to impact that geology. And then we're physically going to take the samples of that geology after we've done that and run it through our patent pending methodology called equilibria to understand how and measure the impacts of your frac source water, and then what it looks like with the appropriate protocols added to it, chemistries that allow it to go into dynamic equilibrium. And from that, we predict what the well's going to do and then measure that post completion for the promise. But the best way to start is to get us the information on your geology. And if you already have done the science and done the XRF on your geology, that's a great place to start, and help gives us the opportunity to explain and teach our process and create the opportunity for questions.
All right. So excellent. If you've been listening to these and this is something that is, that you need to start considering in your process, reaching out to Lloyd, you get an idea what it looks like. Lloyd, where's the best place to find you?
Lloyd.brown@refinedcompletions.com or at CL, is it C Lloyd B? Refined C Lloyd B. Thank you. God. But really, go to our website, click on the contact us, fill out the information. We'll get with you hit me up on LinkedIn, whatever you need to do.
It's a good process. It's at the least you're going to learn and you're going to leave more enlightened, more clarity.
Well, it's intuitive. That's the one consistent word.
This is the process that even the Germans approve of.
Most importantly, they did.
Right?
That's right.
That's not easy. All right. Another great episode, Lloyd. Refined completions, why wells fail. Lloyd Brown. We'll see you next week, same time, another episode of Why Wells Fail. And that's a wrap.
Thanks, Steve.